Alright guys, so obviously I'm not in today, so let's go ahead and do this DBQ together. I'm going to go to World History 2 in your Canvas course if you're not accessing this through your Announcements tab. And you're going to go to Unit 2, Reformation. Inside there is DBQ 2, Henry VIII's Children. Click on that. You guys are going to take the actual test. I'm just going to preview it. And we're going to read through this together. A little bit of background. Henry VIII had 6 wives over the course of his life, but only 3 children. Henry VIII, when he wanted to marry his second wife, that meant he had to divorce his first wife. And the Catholic Church said, no, you can't do that. So what does Henry VIII do as a completely rational person? He completely destroys the Catholic Church in England and creates his own church so he can divorce his wife and move on to his next side piece. Okay? So, what we're going to do is read about his kids, which kind of show the aftermath of Henry VIII creating a new church. So, breaking away from the Catholic Church and creating a new church, which is Protestantism. Okay? Alright. So, some of these questions are going to be fill in the blank, so make sure you're paying attention. And some are multiple choice. So our questions: who was Edward VI's mother? Why did Edward have a council of regency rule when he was king? And what religion were Edward VI and his council in support of? Why did the council not want Mary I, Edward's older half-sister, to become queen? Okay, so those are the questions we're going to keep in mind while we're reading this short bit here on Edward. Edward was the King of England for only a few years and died at 15, but his short reign saw the full-scale introduction of Protestantism. Edward was born on the 12th of October, 1537, at Hampton Court Palace, the only legitimate son of Henry VIII. Henry's desperation for a son had led him to divorce 2 wives, but Edward's mother, Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, died a few years after his birth. Edward was given a rigorous education and was intellectually precarious, although his health was never strong. Edward became king at the age of 9, when his father died in January of 1547. His father had arranged that a council of regency should rule on his behalf, but Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, took power and established himself as proctor. Somerset and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, were intent on making England a truly Protestant state, supported by the young king. An English prayer book was issued in 1549 with an act of uniformity to enforce it. Alright, so we've already answered this question. Who was his mother? Why did Edward have a council of regency rule when he was king? Okay. Real quick, it doesn't outwardly say why, but if you use your thinker, right? How old was he when he became king? Right? Was he someone who was old or inexperienced? No, right? It said early there that he died at age 15, right? So he's not going to have a lot of experience. So what Henry VIII did was put together this council ahead of time so that he would have someone who was experienced. So why did he have that? This question sometimes trips kids up. Okay, because he was so young when he took the throne. That's why this Council of Regency ruled, so that they could make more informed decisions than that of a 9-year-old. I don't know about you, but I do not trust 9-year-olds to run a household, let alone an entire country. Okay. And then we did answer, what religion were Edward and his council in support of? Okay, I'm going to let you answer that on your own. But it does tell you. Alright. In the summer of 1549, peasants in the West Country revolted in protest against the prayer book. Kett's rebellion in Norfolk was focused on economic and social injustices. At the same time, the French declared war on England. The Norfolk rebellion was suppressed by John Dudley, Earl of Warwick. In the atmosphere of uncertainty, Dudley exploited his success by bringing about the downfall of Somerset, who was arrested and later executed. Although Dudley, later Duke of Northumberland, never took title of protector, this is the role he now assumed. Protestant reform was stepped up. The new prayer book of 1552 was avowedly Protestant. Altars were turned into tables, religious imagery destroyed, and religious orthodoxy was enforced by a new and more stringent act of uniformity. It soon became clear that Edward was suffering from tuberculosis and would not live long. Northumberland was determined that his religious reforms should not be undone. So what he's saying is that all the work he's done to make sure England is now Protestant is not going to be undone. So he persuaded Edward to approve a new order of succession. This declared Mary illegitimate and passed the throne to Northumberland's daughter-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, who was a more distant descendant of Henry VIII. Edward died on the 6th of July, 1553. However, Jane was only queen for a few days until, with overwhelming popular support, Mary took the throne. So, why did the council not want Mary to become queen? Because she's going to undo that work, okay? Mary the First is Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon's daughter. So Mary the First is actually his first child, his oldest child, but she's Catholic. So her mom and Henry VIII were Catholic. Henry wanted to divorce Mary's mom and turned away from Catholicism. Okay? So despite everything, Mary is very Catholic. So she doesn't like that England is Protestant. All right, let's learn a little bit more about Mary. And as we do so, why did Henry break with Roman and Catholicism? Why did Mary I become a bastardized child? What religion did Mary practice? Well, I've already told you. What two policies did Mary want to impose after becoming queen that were not popular amongst her people? And how did Bloody Mary earn her nickname? Mary I, the first queen to rule England in her own right, she was known as Bloody Mary for her persecution of Protestants in a vain attempt to restore Catholicism to England. There you go. You've already answered that last question, so it's a little out of order, but that's okay. So that's number 9. Okay. Persecution of Protestants in a vain attempt to restore Catholicism in England. You can put that in your own words, a little bit more simplified if you so chose. All right. Mary was born at Greenwich on the 18th of February, 1516, the only surviving child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Her life was radically altered when Henry divorced Catherine to marry Anne Boleyn. He claimed that the marriage was incestuous and illegal, as Catherine had been married to his dead brother Arthur. The Pope disagreed, resulting in Henry's break with Rome and the establishment of the Church of England. Henry's allegations of incest effectively bastardized Mary. Hey, there you go. That answers another one of your questions here. Okay? Because he's saying that her mom was married to my brother first because I slept with my sister-in-law. That makes Mary a bastard child because she's a child of incest. But the Pope didn't think so. Okay, but there you go. That answers question 6. Okay? All right, moving on. After Anne Boleyn bore Henry another daughter, Elizabeth, Mary was forbidden access to her parents and stripped of her title of princess. Mary never saw her mother again. With Anne Boleyn's fall, there was a chance of reconciliation between father and daughter, but Mary refused to recognize her father as head of the church. She eventually agreed to submit to her father, and Mary returned to court and was given a household suitable to her position. She was named as heir to the throne after her younger brother Edward, born in 1537. Edward VI succeeded his father in 1547, and, under the protectorate of the Duke of Northumberland, zealously promoted Protestantism. Mary, however, remained a devout Catholic. When it became clear that Edward was dying, Northumberland made plans for his daughter-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, to take the throne in Mary's place. On Edward's death in 1553, Jane was briefly acclaimed queen. But Mary had widespread popular support and within days made a triumphal entry into London. Once again, she was determined to reimpose Catholicism and marry Philip II of Spain. Okay, so these are her two policies. Neither policy was popular. So if you go down to question number 8, there you go. Reimpose Catholicism and marry Philip II of Spain. Those are her two policies that were not popular. Philip was Spanish and therefore distrusted, and many in England now had a vested interest in the prosperity of the Protestant church, having received church lands and money after Henry dissolved the monasteries. In 1554, Mary crushed a rebellion led by Sir Thomas White. Making the most of her advantage, she married Philip, pressed on with the restoration of Catholicism, and revived the laws against heresy. Over the next 3 years, hundreds of Protestants were burned at the stake. This provoked disillusionment with Mary, deepened by an unsuccessful war against France, which led to the loss of Calais, England's last possession in France, in January 1558. Childless, sick, and deserted by Philip, Mary died on the 17th of November, 1558. Her hopes for a Catholic England died with her. Okay, so number 5, you should be able to answer number 5 on your own. All right, let's move on and do Elizabeth I really quickly. Who was her mother? What happened to Elizabeth when she was 2, or Elizabeth's mother when she was 2? What helped Elizabeth repair her relationship with her father? And why was Elizabeth under constant speculation when her sister was queen? And why, when Mary hated her so, did Elizabeth become queen after her sister's death? Sorry, I'm going to go through this a little fast because I only have a 15-minute time limit of free recording. All right. Elizabeth I. The long-awaited day had arrived. Henry VIII was proudly expecting the birth of his first son with his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Okay, so this is Elizabeth's mom, Anne Boleyn. His failure to produce a surviving son with his first spouse, Catherine of Aragon, had been a point of much contention, spurring him to break with the Catholic Church in Rome in order to remarry. Henry was so sure that a child was going to be a boy that he had letters drawn up in advance proclaiming the birth of a prince. But on the 7th of September, 1533, Anne gave birth to a girl in Greenwich Palace, much to the disappointment of the king. The celebratory joust was cancelled, and an S hastily added to the proclamations before they were issued. So instead of saying prince, it says princess. The child who had inherited her father's flaming red hair was named Elizabeth after her grandmothers Elizabeth of York and Elizabeth Howard. At her birth, Elizabeth was the heir presumptive, but her place in the line of succession would fluctuate. When she was just 2 years old, her mother was executed, and Elizabeth was declared illegitimate. So there you go, there's one of those question answers. The same fate that had befallen her elder half-sister Mary after the annulment of her parents' marriage. Elizabeth subsequently only saw her father on special occasions and was just 4 years old when the prince that Henry so desperately craved, Edward, was born to his third wife, Jane Seymour. It wasn't until 1543 that Henry repaired his fractured relationship with his 2 daughters, and only then, thanks to the interventions of his 6th and final wife, Catherine Parr. So, what was the reason those relationships were repaired? It's because of his last wife, Catherine Parr. So that's another one of your answers there. That is number 12. Okay. The princesses were restored to the line of succession once more after Edward. After Henry VIII's death in 1547, Elizabeth went to live with Parr and her new husband, Thomas Seymour, Jane Seymour's brother, who had previously expressed a desire to marry the 13-year-old princess. It's been speculated that Seymour may have abused the young Elizabeth. Her governess reported seeing Seymour frequently enter the princess's rooms and behaving inappropriately. It's unclear how Parr felt about her husband's behavior, but she finally sent Elizabeth away after catching the pair in an embrace. Seymour renewed his machinations to marry Elizabeth after Parr died in 1548, but was executed for treason before his plans amounted to anything. More upheaval was to come. In 1553, Edward VI died of tuberculosis. Just before he passed, he drew up a will excluding his half-sisters from the throne once more in favor of his cousin, Lady Jane Grey. Jane's rule only lasted for 9 days before Mary seized the throne. Elizabeth didn't fare much better during Mary's reign, and she was constantly under suspicion for plotting against her half-sister. So there you go. There's your other answer for number 13, because it was assumed that she was plotting against her sister. In 1554, Elizabeth was imprisoned for a year after Wyatt's rebellion, a revolt that arose out of anger at Mary's decision to marry Philip of Spain. It is said that the rebels wanted to replace Mary with Elizabeth, although there was no evidence she was involved. Elizabeth's turn to rule came in 1558, at the age of 25, after Mary died childlessly. Although she was not the son Henry had hoped for, Elizabeth is widely remembered as the most successful monarch of the Tudor dynasty and proof that women could rule without a husband. So, why did For 14, Mary had no other heirs, no other options.